It is episode 8 of Broadcast Booth Stories from Inside the Headsets of Play-by-Play. Our special guest today is Brian Estridge, play-by-play voice of TCU Athletics. I'm Brian Jensen, your host for this show, if you will, and I'm very excited about today's guest because this is a guy that we've run parallel paths, I think, for quite a bit of time now in the Big 12, doing some football at least. I did a little basketball. He does basketball, but the football side of things is where we really run up with each other in many times. And we talk stories about what goes on behind the mic. We talk stories about things that may happen inside a booth, outside a booth, whatever the case may be. And as we sit down sometimes in the Big 12 with some of the fellow broadcasters, some of those stories come up, and those are some of the most entertaining times that I think we have in the Big 12, and I'm sure that happens in conferences around the country. But with no further ado, quick introduction, here is Brian Estridge. Welcome, Brian.
Brian, it is an honor to be here, man. I'm looking forward to this conversation. This is, two guys sitting on bar stools telling stories. That's my kind of day, man.
Yeah, I think it's going to be pretty fun, too, especially the fact that, I look at what you're sitting inside right there, and that's going to be the first story is the little setups that we have here, because I think this is it's kind of become part of what happened, obviously, during the pandemic. Some of this happened a little bit earlier for some of us in the broadcast world, but, having setups in our home, having setups in stadiums or wherever the case may be for both broadcast and, heck, even Zoom calls these days.
It is, there's a word in basketball that we use, pivot, right? And we've all had to pivot. We've all had to be flexible and change and kind of give a whole new look to things. And it's amazing what we were able to accomplish. If we'd have had this pandemic 10 or 15 years ago, Brian, I don't know what we would have done. Without Zoom, without the ability to broadcast remotely like we have. What you see here, this is my home studio office. And so I do a morning radio show on WBAP. This is where it originates from. I haven't been in the studio in 400 days, 400 plus days. This is where we had to also produce some road basketball games this year. So the TCU crew would all come to my house. We would get the video feed here, and this is where we would produce the games from. We did it with one football game this year that we didn't travel to. So yeah, this is kind of been and the timing was great. And you see some of these shots here. Yeah, this is a shot of us doing a basketball game earlier in the year. So you see us just all kind of gathered here in my office. This was a plan that I had in place prior to COVID for the radio show, if nothing else. And then that's the Kansas football game there. The process and the timetable sped up a little bit when COVID came, and fortunately we kind of had it in the works, and so it's worked out good. I mean, there's nothing like being there, as you know. We all want to be at the event, but in this case, when we couldn't be there, when we were asked to figure out another way, we were able to pull it off.
Well, and this is something too that I think people should understand is also part of your overall career, not just your broadcast play-by-play career. You see the Red Voice logo behind you. I mean, this is something that you do every day, all day, every day.
Yeah, and it's a whole bunch of things. I have the morning show on WBAP. I do the TCU games, obviously, and then a company that I started in 2006. We do 17 college bowl games nationally. We've ventured out on the sales side and helping some other entities, obviously predominantly in sports. But out of this office, we produce and sell and distribute and syndicate those 17 bowl games plus some early season college basketball tournaments. So and we're fortunate that we got folks in Charlotte, Pittsburgh, Morgantown, West Virginia that all work for us. And so, but again, that kind of what we're going through right now in the pandemic. We don't all have to be in the same office. We don't all have to have, space in downtown Fort Worth or downtown Dallas. We can all kind of work in our pods, and the power of Zoom and digital technology, we're able to pull it all off.
Well, and I think one of the things that I wanted to show for those that are watching on YouTube, and if you're getting this on the podcast, you need to tune into YouTube. While you were doing your broadcast for the English-speaking audience, I guess, for TCU, you had the Spanish version also going on in your house?
Exactly. This was in the opposite end of that studio. So the previous shot you saw was from one end of our studio, and so I had this sort of other area set up in an opposite end of the studio for the Spanish guys. So we had two broadcasts going on in the same area, essentially separated a little bit by a wall there. But yeah, and we were able to pull it off, and so. Again, like you said earlier, it was so true. We all pivoted. We all kind of were flexible. We were able to figure out a way to make it work, and the technology helped a ton. But I was proud of these guys. That's Miguel Cruz and Elvis Gallegos, who've been doing our Spanish broadcast of TCU football for well over a decade, and they do a great job. And you know what? Here's the thing, and Brian, you saw this. There's some guys, and you didn't have to suffer through it in football. But there are some guys that this was really hard on, and I had empathy for them and completely understood that there is something about being there.
Yeah.
But then there were other guys like you saw Elvis and Miguel there who were able to shine during it because they had to do more games remotely than we did on the English side, just from a travel perspective and expenditure perspective, and so they were able to pull it off. And so I'm proud of all those guys that said, you know what, we're going to figure out a way to make this work.
Yeah, I think we were really lucky. We really lucked out, and I mentioned this on an earlier episode. We did all the games on location, but basketball did everything on the at home, everything in a back end of the arena in their studio location, and like you had to do it off of a monitor, which I've talked to a couple other guys. So your experience, your background. A, had you ever done a game off a monitor before? B, what were some of the things you had to immediately adjust to? And would you really want to do it again?
And that's a great question. Would you really want to do it again? I almost sent you a photo about 5 years ago. TCU was playing basketball at Oklahoma, and we were scheduled to go. The team had, of all things, taken the train to Norman. I mean, it was like we were back in the 1940s.
Wow!
But because as you know, there's a fairly quick train that runs between Fort Worth and Oklahoma City, and so the team had taken the train because a snowstorm was coming in Oklahoma. The team took the train. They had left the day early. We said, you know what, we're not going to take the train. We'll just drive up. Well, the ice was awful on I-35, and so we could not get there. And so we called that basketball game off of the monitors in the football press box. So we went to our football press box, to our booth, and we called the game from up there. And Toby and the folks at Oklahoma were kind enough to send us an effects feed, which is the basket mics and the floor squeaks and all that sort of thing. They were able to send us an effects feed from the arena. Nice. To us. We called it off of the television. We're able to pull it off. So that was 5 years ago. And then we had to do it again this year. And you ask what we had to adjust to. There's several things. One is, I never, this is going to sound funny, I never appreciated referees as much as I do now, because we got when you're calling a game remotely off of a monitor, you don't have you can't see the numbers that they call for the fouls. You can't hear any conversation, or we kind of read lips, or you can kind of see what's going on. So you miss the interaction with the officials. That's one thing. Second thing you miss is substitutions.
Yeah.
Because you're so focused on the floor, you don't see a guy getting up off the bench, ready to come in, things of that nature, and then all of a sudden you look up and there's a new guy on the floor.
Well, and you're not seeing anything outside of the monitor, right? You're not seeing anything outside of the camera. Whatever the camera sees, you see. It's just like somebody at home. Whereas when you are at the arena, your eyes, you have the vision to be able to see everything that's going on. So, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
And that was difficult at first, but then and we had a couple of guys around the league that I'm sure you've talked to that said that would lose their feed or things of that nature, and that's where you had to rely on. We have a kind of a stat play-by-play that what's that thing called? Stat broadcast, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It kind of gives you a running play-by-play of what's going on. So if you lost your feed, if you lost your video feed, because we weren't just using the the television, over the air feed because we wanted to get it a little quicker. If you lost that, you kind of had to rely on that stat broadcast, and it was almost as if we were Ronald Reagan again, redoing baseball games with with the teletype or whatever. And so there were some things. Would I do it again? I'll tell you.
Well,
this,
you may have to. So be careful with this answer, right?
Exactly. You're right. We may have to. And I will tell you this. This made me feel good. Is the general manager here at TCU? We all kind of work for Learfield IMG. A lot of, I guess, is it every school in the league? Is that Brian?
Pretty much,
every
yes.
School
Yep.
The general manager here came to me and he said, "Listen, I want you to be at every game. But I want you to be calling games for a long time. So if at any point during the basketball season and future years you come to me and say, Brian, come to me and say, hey, boss man, my son or daughter has a game or an event at the school I want to be able to get to. I don't want to, I'm tired. You need to call a game remotely?" He said, "We can do it." He said, "But I want you at every game." So that made me feel good. So there may be a time when we do it again. I can't envision it right now, but it's good to know we can pull it off if we have to.
Well, and I think you're exactly right in that regard. This has certainly added a whole new dimension, a whole new element to, I think, everybody's broadcast and everybody's ability to do different things. And it also has certainly added flexibility to the broadcast companies to be able to say, hey, you know what, it's obviously doable. It's no longer as big a concern for us if all of a sudden something goes down. We've got ways to fix that. I remember the one time I've had a very close experience to what you were talking about was we did a bowl game in Houston where I got there in time just before the ice storm hit, and the rest of the crew couldn't get out of Lubbock. So I ended up doing the game with some assistance of individuals that were in the Houston area. So, that was the adaptation at that time. But the adaptation today would be completely different. I mean, it would be one of those things where we'd be able to put each other on, Zoom or whatever the case might be. Hey, this is called Switcher Studio that I'm using here today. So maybe that's the program that's used. But yeah, ways to do things now.
You could send Chris Level outside by the highway. And he's outside doing sideline reports from there, right? And still get the effect of what's going on. Yeah, I think that we all kind of have learned through this. I mean, here's Brian. I try to be a positive guy. I try to look for the good. And as much as the pandemic sucked, and as bad as 2021 was for everyone, let's face it, there were some good things that came out of this, and let's chalk this up as one of those that we are able to be a little bit more flexible.
Yeah, I think that is a great point, Mr. Positive. I appreciate that very much. I think one of the other things too is the travel situation. I think COVID and the whole pandemic thing, and how are you going to get to games? I think we got a little spoiled maybe leading up to the pandemic as to how we traveled, those kinds of things, because jumping on the plane with the team, never really even thought about it that much. I jump on Southwest from Dallas to Lubbock constantly, never really thought about jumping in a car and having to drive. That changed a little bit, and now it's people talk to you and they go, so how are you going to get there? How do you travel? Oh, I don't know. We'll figure it out. Because it's no longer it has to be this way, right?
Yeah, I'm not. I don't know if we'll travel with the team. I'd like to think that we'll get back to that. But if we don't, that's okay too. I think we'll stay in the team hotels. But if we don't, that's okay as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, things are going to change. Things again, though. Let's all say that we're changing for the better. And I think one of the things that we learned too is that we learned that not to sweat the small stuff.
Yeah,
there were some guys that I think got upset because they no longer could eat with the team or no longer travel on the team plane or, things of that nature. But you know what, Brian, in the grand scheme of things, those are nothing, man. We still get paid to call games, and we're not roofing houses in the middle of the summertime in Texas, and so there's something to be said for that.
Well, here's two things that can't change. Okay, number one, you guys have maybe. I thought we had the biggest broadcast team in the Big 12. You guys are probably pretty close. But the other thing that just can't change is your game day buffet. Now this, people that are watching this on YouTube, this is a shot inside the booth at
Right.
TCU, right?
Yeah. And we
Wow.
try to get you guys to come over and get some as well. Feed the visiting team. But right, this is inside the
Wait,
home
wait, wait,
radio booth.
really?
Yeah, yeah. Come on over. But here's the thing. Here's the thing about that. We felt like we had to do because we probably have the worst location,
Oh, yeah.
wouldn't you say, for a
Yes.
broadcast booth? But we tried to have some of the best booths, if nothing else. So we gave you plenty of room. We tried to make them spacious. We tried to make the amenities nice. But as you can see there, so this is home radio, and Brian, you're broadcasting to the left of me here.
Further out of the
You can
end zone.
see- yeah, we're at the back of the end zone. I mean, it's like you're calling a game in DC at FedEx or whatever. I mean, it's tough. But and unfortunately, you see this as a growing trend, especially on the
Yeah.
NFL side. But you know what? We try to make the best of it, and at first it kind of hacked me off. I was
Yeah.
like, man, where are we at the 50? And
Yeah.
but now I'm just kind of like, hey, I'm in the stadium. We're getting paid to call the game.
Wait, we're supposed to have the best seat in the house, not the
Right,
worst seat
I
in
know.
the house, right?
I know. Now that's what happens with TV. TV always gets the best seat in the house.
No doubt, no doubt. But you know what? And you're right about and this is another adjustment thing. And you know, when you work in the business long enough, and both of us have, as I said in the beginning, we kind of parallel paths. I mean, I'm going into my 21st season. You're in the 20s now, right? So with TCU. So I mean, we've seen a lot. We've been through a lot. And when we first showed up at your new booth, fortunately, I had the experience already at AT&T Stadium in Arlington. So
Yes.
I knew that the contractors and some of the setup was going to be similar. I had heard, so I kind of had a feel. But here's the one thing we've had to adjust to at your stadium. Every single time we come there, I don't think people realize that are in the stadium where the speakers are set in your stadium. Yep. They are set maybe two very small luxury booths to the left of us. And the open windows, these speakers blast right into our booth. Yes. And boy, that was hard to get used to at first because there's just so much going on.
I wish that, and I think there are, we're going to get in the weeds here a little bit. I think there's some stadiums that do a really good job to where the sound is all around the stadium. Mm-hmm. And I think some have a almost a single origination point for the public address system, and I think that's what TCU's has, and it's right there by us. You're right, and it is so loud. And you like me, you like to have the booth, you like to have the open air booth. I mean, I like the feel of the
absolutely.
game. It doesn't matter what the temperature is. I got the booth window open, but when in our place you open the window, you get the public address announcer.
Right.
So yeah, that is a tough adjustment and. Unfortunately, one of those battles that sometimes you have to pick your battles, and that was one of those that I couldn't win.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt that, as you say, I mean, it's very important in our business to pick your battles.
Yes,
because hey, we're kind of a afterthought, I think, a lot of times because of the fact, and this is what one of our the GM of Learfield IMG College tells us on many occasions each season when we have our production meeting, and I'm sure the preseason production meeting, and I'm sure you have the same experience. Again, this has a lot to do with experience and time. He kind of he says, hey, whatever you guys want to do, we don't really even think about it because we just know it's going to get taken care of, right?
Yeah,
and that's one of the things. But that's one of the things I don't think people realize. You don't do just a broadcast. Right? You don't do just I'm going to get my board together, I'm going to throw out some names, and I'm going to call a game. There's a lot more to it. You might help run some of the lines on a road game. You might help carry the equipment up. You might help plug some of the stuff in if your producer engineer is wanting you to do that. And I mean, there's a lot to it.
And not to mention, going on the road, how different booths give you different setups, and you got to prep and you got to plan for that. And you think about what post game is going to be, and there's a lot that goes into it during the week. But you're right. Sometimes I do think it's taken for granted that hey, they'll get on the air, they'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And we used to joke that one day we shouldn't get on the air, and maybe they would recognize. But you don't want to do that because you take great pride in your work, right? I mean, you want to make sure it happens. And so
Learfield IMG, that was Brian Estridge that was saying
that. Exactly. But I think there is value And I think there is a subtle respect that's shown to us by saying, "You guys will figure it out." And so maybe they do appreciate us more than we know. I know fans do. Believe me, you know that. I know fans do. I know sponsors do. I think there's, I think those are all. And listen, I know that our bosses do. I think there's just a level of respect that they know that, hey, that it's going to happen. These guys are pros, and there's something to be said for that too.
So when for you did it almost not go on, or did something come up that people may not be very aware of because it went off fine?
Yeah, I guess there have been instances in places where the lines didn't work, or I can remember back. So I started years ago at Appalachian State, which people only know Appalachian State because they beat Michigan.
Right.
Well, I wasn't there when they beat Michigan, so but I will tell you this, Brian, my favorite coach, one of my favorite coaches that I've worked for, is a Tech guy, and Jerry Moore.
Oh yeah, Jerry,
who won national championships there at App State, who had coached at Texas Tech, and that staff and I were real close. In fact, there's a couple of three guys who were Red Raiders that are I consider some of my best friends. We lost one of them in Rob Best last year. I need to tell you that story at some point before we leave, Brian. And then David Canal. So guys that played at Tech. Anyway, so we're in Boone at Appalachian State, and we're playing at Middle Tennessee State. And you've probably never been there, but it's in Murfreesboro. And there was an incident there where someone outside of the stadium hit a power pole. And so we lost power. We had to get real creative real fast to do a post-game interview. And this was way back in the 90s when cell phones had just come out with the big brick white phones. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I had Jerry Moore doing a post-game show on that phone, back in the day. So, yeah, I think there have been some of those incidents over the years that have happened. But knock on wood, I mean, now you carry so much equipment with you.
Yes.
And the technology has gotten so good that it's really hard to have. And if you've got a really good engineer, and I know you do, and I'm fortunate to have one at TCU, they figure it out. I don't know if it's duct tape and baling wire, as they say, but sometimes they get you in the ear, and that's a good thing.
It's whatever it needs to be, right? Band-Aids. Yeah. And in fact, sometimes it's medication, and I'm not kidding you in that. So we also had a game at New Mexico where we lost power at one time during the game, and the whole stadium did. It was a wild thing. But the one game that I recall, I personally almost didn't get on the air. My producer, engineer, and John Harris, the color analyst, and Chris Level down on the field helped me just dramatically, because I was coming up the hill at UTEP. You've been in El Paso. You know that you park way down at the bottom of the hill, and you have to walk way up this hill. Well, I'm helping carrying the equipment, and all of a sudden, now we had a huge, which we typically do on the road, a huge meal the night before at a really good Mexican food place, and it absolutely hit me hard halfway up the hill, and I got so sick to my stomach, and I got up to the booth finally, and I was sweating like crazy, and I'm like, guys, I don't think I can go. And Chris Level goes, well, hang on a minute, I think I can help you out. He runs down to the medical staff, right, and talk about carrying a lot of stuff. They carry just about an entire pharmaceutical company with them, right? And a minute later, he's running up the stairs to me, gives me some medication, says the trainer's coming up for you. He came up, took a look at me, made sure everything was okay, gave me what I needed to have, and I mean, 5 minutes before we went on the air, I started feeling better, and it was like, wow, this is So there's a lot that goes into getting these broadcasts clean.
I can remember back in the Mountain West days when TCU was in the Mountain West, we were playing a big game with Utah. When Utah was good, TCU was good at the time, and it was a game here at Amon Carter Stadium. And I'd never had this happen to me before, and hopefully I never have it happen again. Again to me. But for 3 days before the game, Ryan, I got laryngitis.
Oh my!
And I mean, this was a huge game. It was an ESPN primetime game. It was, at that point where TCU was in college football, it was a very important game. And I remember 3 days prior to it, I just couldn't talk. and I'm calling everyone. And as you know, here in the Dallas Fort Worth market, there a lot of folks loved Mark Holtz, the voice of the Rangers, for
Oh
years.
yeah.
And he was gone at the time, but one of the guys gave me a remedy that he used. Galloway gave it to me. Randy Galloway gave me the remedy that he used, and it was some sort of blackberry wine and
Oh, I got to write this one down.
Yeah, exactly. It was some. Yeah, I don't even know where you get blackberry wine, but anyway, but somehow, some way, it saved me. It got me by to where I could at least get through on that Saturday, because I really wanted to do it. And you know, you hate to get to that point as the play-by-play voice of a team to where you have to punt.
Yeah. Oh,
to where
yeah.
you don't want to get there and say, I can't do it, man. And
Yeah.
you don't want to do it for a big game, especially. And so, we find a way to fight through and plow through, and somehow did that one. And I was trying to think when you brought that up. I don't know. Again, knock on wood here. I don't know that I've ever missed a game due to sickness.
Yeah, that was the only time that I've been close. And here's one of my favorite pieces of equipment. You might agree with that. The old cough drop switch.
Yeah.
And I told this story before, but you mentioned you don't want to be sick, especially on the big games. Well, the biggest game of my career so far was the Crabtree catch against Texas.
Oh yeah.
In 2008, and I had a cold leading into that game. It was a Halloween. It was the day after Halloween. It was I'd had a cold throughout the week. I got there, my throat was already scratchy. John was feeding, literally during the game, John was feeding me cough drops, and I don't mean the electronic kind, but the lozenge kind. I was sucking on those most of the game, and by the time I got to the fourth quarter, I was losing my voice pretty rapidly. And that last call was, talking about pushing it out. It was just one of those where you just fight it. You just say, I got to get this call out, right?
You got it done. You nailed it, though.
Well, thank you there. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Okay.
You're right. You got to try, you fight through. You see players fight through. We talk about coaches fighting all the time. Well, sometimes we got to suck it up too, right?
Well, and we got to prep a lot too. Tell me about your prep work.
I enjoy the prep process. It has changed over the years. Yeah, that's a picture of my board there, and then another little sheet that I make that is kind of just talking facts that I want to try to work through at one point. Did you like? I even picked the tech one. How about that? I was able to find that one.
Well, I prepared too. Look, so here's mine that getting prepped on the screen, and wait, here's the finished product. And again, I made sure TCU. That was last year's game. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. But boy, have computers really helped us. Back in the day when we started, we were on a whatever your system was. You were handwriting it out. You were working on a Manila folder. However you figured out a way to get it done. And so what we're able to do electronically now is awesome. And there are even services out there that help you kind of build your board that'll do background information for you in research. So my process is, I'm one of those guys that I try to do it by a process, and that on the play, you'll think this is goofy, on the plane ride home Saturday night after the game, I usually pull out my laptop and I start updating the TCU stats on my board. And then come Monday and Tuesday is when I'm implementing or putting in the opponent for the next week's 2 deep.
Yeah.
And then Tuesday night, my process generally is Tuesday night and Wednesday is when I'm putting biographical information in on the opponent.
Yeah.
And then I try to have everything buttoned up and done by midday Thursday.
Yeah.
Because Thursday night I do a coach's show, and then after the coach's show, I try to write our pregame script. And Friday, I try to clear it, man.
Yeah.
I'm one of those guys that on Friday, I just need a clear head. I don't need to be thinking about that. I try to, as best I can, make that family day.
Yeah.
But at that point, to me, the hay's in the barn coming up on Friday. So, and I guess that's not much different, Brian, if you think about it, than what a coaching staff does, because they've got the game plan in place.
Right.
On Friday they're just walking through. It's they're not still looking at film. They're not still trying to figure out what play is going to work on 3rd and 16.
Yeah,
they've got the hay in the barn as well.
I'm pretty much the same on most of your routine. The difference that I have on Fridays, we meet with the coaches, the offensive and defensive coordinators. So it gives us the opportunity to sit down with them and really take our boards, take our information in there with us and go, okay, so now who's not starting this week? Because
exactly
that's always the first question, because typically that you don't know that. They're not going to be that open with you until it's the final button down moment where they may still say, well, last year with COVID tests, we don't know. We're not going to know till tomorrow. Okay, but who do you think is not good? So you start kind of picking their brain in that way a little bit too. The other thing, Brian, that I think has really changed over the years and is so great for us is the ability to pull highlights of teams that we're about to see that we may not have seen a lot. So if it's not a Big 12 team, or if it's not one that we were able to catch a couple of games leading up to it, we're able to find highlights so quickly. Whereas back in the day, you went with the media guide, you went with the press release, and if you were able to get some clips of a game, it came on videotape, and you were trying to figure out how the heck you were going to find what you were looking for. I mean, it was just completely different. So hate to say that we have it easy these days, but it's better.
Yeah, and again, it's technology. It's how technology has helped us. One of the things I left out is that we try to use some audio during the game from the opponent, coaches, players, things of that nature. We'll swap audio back and forth, and that's part of the prep process as well. You're editing down audio, you're making sure you got all the cuts that you want in there, you're laying all that stuff out, and so I think it all kind of plays into I don't think people realize that for a 3.5, 4 hour broadcast on a Saturday, you've put in about 16 to 20 hours worth of work in preparation for it. My rule of thumb, and I tell young broadcasters this all the time when they say, what do you know? How do you know what to put on your board, what not to put on the board? I said, for me, and this is different for some folks, but for me, my football board, if I use 30% of what is on my board, that's high.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I've got it there if I ever need it. Like I started doing something last year that, Brian, you probably, being here in Texas for a couple of decades, you've been able to do. And I started adding in little subtle things that I want to use periodically. Like if a kid's from Texas and he's on the opposing team, I'll try to work in his high school's mascot,
Nice,
just for grins.
Nice.
Curiosity, like if a kid is, if we're playing Texas Tech and they got a kid from Itasca, I'm going to work in Wampus Cat somehow.
Nice.
Nice. I'm going to work that in. So, even adding those into my chart every year now, I try to find something every year, just a little something, extra. And then all of a sudden you look up after, as you said, 20 plus years and you go, man, do I need all this?
Yeah, exactly.
But it's there if I need it.
But you never know when you do. Right. Exactly.
Exactly. Right. How many times you've been in a rain delay of late or a lightning delay? We didn't have these when we started.
No, we didn't have these, and we had the epic one at Oklahoma when everybody left the field. They went and had peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and Tech came out and was just en fuego and beat Oklahoma that day. So, but you're right. During that time, we're looking at each other like, okay, what are we going to fill with? And then we finally got to a point where it's like, can we throw this back to a coach's show or something? Because you finally do run out of material at that point, and at the same time, nobody wants to sit there and listen for half an hour or more of that kind of stuff. Well, quite frankly, Brian, you're becoming a talk show is what you are. And if they want to hear you as a talk show, that's great. But you kind of need to be ready with that, right?
Yeah, and that's how we treated it. I mean, you go into talk show mode. It's you're at that point you're lining up guests. You're using your sideline reporter as a true reporter. Whether he's down in the with the safety officials trying to figure out when the game's going to start, or he's in your locker room talking to your coaches and sports medicine staff to try to figure out, hey, when are we gonna start this thing back up? I mean, you're doing all you can to try to gather information. I can remember one of the ones that we had where we actually brought in. I got the grounds crew leader on the air with me. And put him on a headset down on the field. What do you and he goes through, what the field is made up of right now, how long it's going to take for it to drain, blah, 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 blah. And You're right. I mean, it becomes a talk show at that point, and anybody and everybody's a potential guest. And so, but those are, that's, to me, I get a rush out of that sometimes, Brian. It's not. I don't say to afterwards. I don't go, man, that was work. I go, man, that was fun. You know, especially when you pull.
Well, yeah, I'm going to bust my producer engineer just a little bit here, Steve Pitts.
Yes,
so
he's good.
He's great. So when we hear from Learfield IMG or whatever the production group or rights holder was prior to that, that we're going to expand something. That, okay, you're going to expand your pregame show, or you're going to expand your postgame show, or you're going to be there until they turn every headlight off in the parking lot. Steve's always like, "Oh my gosh, why do we have to?" And I'm like, "Dude, we get to talk for another for another 30 minutes. We'll come up with stuff. Don't worry about it. Yeah. Just keep us on the air. That's all we ask for at that point.
We're not. This isn't brain surgery or rocket science, right? I mean, we're talking about football here. We're talking ball. It's pretty good. It's funny you mentioned that. I was going to give you one. You mentioned you're going to be there until the headlights in the cars go off. I'll tell you a funny story. I was back to those days at Appalachian State with Jerry Moore. We were playing a game at North Carolina A&T, and as the game ended. You did the game in one big press box at North Carolina A&T, so you're sitting beside the public address announcer, reporters, everybody's in there. It's kind of crazy. The game comes to an end. I hear the public address announcer say, and the final score here, Appalachian State 29, North Carolina A&T 19. See you next week when the Aggies take on blah, 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 blah. Good night. And he gets up, and he walks back to behind me, and all I hear is chunk, 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 and he's run down the fuse box and turned all the power off.
No way.
And we were in the air, yes. And I turned to him and I said, "Hey man, we're in the post game show." And he looks at me and said, "Game's over, man. I'm out of here." And of course, our engineer got up and ran over and turned the fuses back on.
That's
but
awesome.
He was just, "Hey, game's over. We're done."
That is awesome.
That's one of those funny incidents where you look back on it and you're mad at the time, but you're like, okay, whatever.
And here's the opposite. And I will tell you, I was not kidding about the headlights in the parking lot. There was a time when Tech owned the rights themselves. They were trying some different things out for the sponsors. And the gentleman that was responsible for the broadcast in the Tech athletic department, I won't mention his name, comes into our booth one day and he goes, "Look, I want you guys to go post-game show as long as you have something to go with. We want people going to their cars, going home, still hearing you. We want to keep it going until the lights go off in the parking lot." And we're like, okay, wow. if you're sure that's what you want. So we did that a couple of times, and I think they finally realized that you might want to package that in a studio type post game show that would get a little bit more of your clips ready and all the kind of post production type stuff that you could pull off in that regard, right?
Right.
But it was an entertaining moment, that's for sure. Let me ask you a couple quick questions before we get away. One of them is about obviously we both have experienced some great athletes that have come through our programs. I've got a picture I'm going to put up of you and Andy Dalton, just because. So both of you. So when there are names that people recognize that then go on to pro sports, whether it's football or basketball for you, football for me, and then they think about the college days and the college ties, they always ask, at least they do me, I'm sure they do you, so what was it like covering him, or what was it like doing games when that person was at school? Who were some of your favorites to be able to say, oh yeah, I was able to do these games with this guy, and you're not going to believe how he did this, that, or the other?
Yeah, well, you're looking at one right there. Obviously, Andy Fulton was a class act here at TCU. He built a student ministry on campus that would average 1,000 kids on a Thursday night. I'll tell you a funny story. My wife, we were young parents at the time. Now our kids are 15 and 16, and that was the Rose Bowl season. And my wife, on the Rose Bowl trip, made it a point to spend some time with Andy's mother. And because she had seen Andy and she had been around Andy, and she just saw how he conducted himself. Mm-hmm. And so my wife kind of just started picking the brain of Andy's mom and said, how did you do it? I mean, how did you develop a young man who's a leader on the football field, is a really good student in the classroom. Is has built a ministry. Just kind of looked like the whole package. And Brian, she gave my wife some great advice. She said, I was in his business every minute. And she said, I knew everything he was doing all the time. And so my wife is now the Tiger mom, is literally like that. But he would be one of those. LaDainian Tomlinson's another one.
Oh, yeah.
When LaDainian was here at TCU, obviously set the record at the time for the individual rushing yardage in a game against, you mentioned UTEP earlier, against UTEP. He's another one. It's been fun to see LaDainian and Andy now become not only great athletes in the success that they had in the NFL, but just to see them as fathers, community leaders. Both of them have been very active in their communities. Andy especially in Cincinnati, but even when he was here in DFW last year, and LaDainian with their foundation and things. So I think those two guys kind of stand out here at TCU. Back from my days at Appalachian, you'll remember this name with the Cowboys, Dexter Coakley.
Oh, yeah.
The linebacker. Dexter was a guy that just, he epitomized what you wanted in a son.
Sure.
Was an overachiever, you remember he was undersized. What was he, 5'9"?
Oh, yeah.
And played in the league.
Little guy, but he packed a punch, man.
Oh, I'm telling you, man. And he was again just a guy who overachieved, that gave you all he had, and another one that you wanted to be around. So those are some guys that really stand. Desmond Bain, who's a basketball player now, plays for the Memphis Grizzlies here. It stands out. But I think I've been fortunate, just like you, in that I had the opportunity to be around good student athletes. Of the 3 universities I've worked at, they've all been student athletes. They haven't just been athletes. And to be around coaches too. That to me are those are the relationships that I cherish.
Yeah, absolutely.
That make this job so rewarding, to be honest.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And I've got to throw out a couple of names too. I mean, obviously with my crunch box over here, Patrick Mahomes is obviously the one that is asked about the most. We've had the Harrell, the Crabtree, the Welker, and then Mahomes. But Mahomes is the one that the stories of when he was in college, because people always say to me, well, you guys, it's not like you guys won the Big 12 when he was there. It's like, no, but the cast around him was not that solid.
Right.
And if you look at the way he kept Tech in games, it's ridiculous. And then you mentioned with kids, these are my kids when they were little, and with Patrick and others, and just one of those great individuals. But quick story, and this is what I try to tell everybody that asks me, what's the one thing from college, Patrick Mahomes, that you remember most? Here's what I remember. He came out pregame before everybody else every game. He would stand on one sideline. The backup quarterback would stand on the other sideline. He would take a football, pretend that he was playing shortstop. He would scoop the ball and throw from way, way, way below even parallel. And that ball would fly across the field on a line and hit the backup quarterback between the 1 and the 6 every single time. And he did that every time. He'd come out and work on that play. So when people are talking about all of the ad-lib stuff that he does, the dude works on it. I never saw somebody that worked harder on things you wouldn't expect to see in a game than that guy. And being able to be in the broadcast booth pregame when no one else is there. I mean, there are no stands, no fans in the stands yet, and to be able to see some of the things these players go through and do to prepare themselves, I think is also something that I cherish in the role that we have.
Think about how lucky you've been too with the quarterbacks that you've had, Brian. I mean, just that whole run of quarterbacks. Now, obviously, not all of them panned out in the NFL, but they all got a sniff.
Yeah,
they all had a chance, and just the numbers that you put up and the exciting calls that you had because of that. And now you get one of the great ones back as one of your assistants in Sonny Cumbie.
This is awesome.
The best dude going. I mean, I think you're real fortunate there to have that experience and love it.
Yep, pretty golden in that regard. And here's a dude that's also pretty fortunate. Brian, I know you do a lot for the community. You do a lot for some of the great programs and organizations in Fort Worth. I want to make sure that we cover a little bit of that on our way out here today.
Yeah, I kind of live by the philosophy of if you help others, it comes back to help you, and there'll be a point where we all need help, and we all need a hand out or a hand up, not a handout, and so I'm willing to do what I can. I think it's important, in our roles. To do that, that's at the Hogan Award, which is it's not necessarily, it is a charitable organization, but to me, it's bigger than that. It's kind of the college golf Heisman, and that happens in Fort Worth every year at Colonial Country Club, and I love that group and what they stand for. And college golf to me is so underrated. I mean, you talk about some wonderful guys, and they're all success. I mean, they're built for success, and they're fun to be around. But I just think it's important that we all kind of do what we can. I'll tell you that. I'll tell you this, Brian, and I'm not worried about offending anyone, but Philippians 2:3 is kind of my life verse, which is, do nothing from self-ambition or conceit, and always count others more important than you. And I think that's kind of what I try to live by.
That is awesome. Outstanding. And I know you wanted to have a little conversation about this gentleman.
And Brian, you may not know this guy, but you probably heard him. This is a guy by the name of Bob Fulton, and Bob Fulton was the 30-year voice of South Carolina, the Gamecocks. And I grew up in a small town in South Carolina, real small town, and much like you, early on figured out what I wanted to do in life. And so I would spend my 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old days listening to Bob Fulton as a kid. My dad listened to every South Carolina Gamecock game. He was a Gamecock graduate. And so I grew up listening to Bob Fulton. And to me, he is still the ultimate. He is still in my ear, in my head. When I'm calling a game, I hear Bob Fulton. I still do some of the, I probably, if you listen to him and you listen to me, there's probably some guys going, man, he copies him in some ways, and I'll admit that.
And that's great.
Yeah, I mean,
that's
to
great.
me, he was just the ultimate, and we all have those guys. Like for you, Brian, who was a guy that you listened to that you say, and I know you might already had him on your show because you had Vern on. I mean, Vern would be a guy that would be on my list too.
Yeah, so there are two that are on mine, and I'm gonna I do a little of the production on this podcast as well as speak on it. So I'm gonna try to pull up the images while we talk. So one of them is right here, and the other one is right here, and I'm gonna put them on the screen for you. So the one on the left, along with Brad Sham, is Vern Lundquist. And Vern and Brad, as a combination, I think those two guys, certainly Vern is the one that actually got me most interested in being in sports casting. And then I followed him as he did his play-by-play work, both with the Cowboys and then nationally. And I wanted to emulate him. I mean, I loved his ad-lib style when he was doing sports on television. And then obviously he carried that through in play-by-play. And I learned that ad-lib from watching and listening to him so much. And Brad carried that on, I think, and does one of the best jobs in the world in describing, in really, telling you what all is going on. He and Eric Nadel. We've benefited greatly, Brian, you and I, with the people in the Dallas-Fort Worth market that are just so wonderful in the professional sports. But the other one, obviously, is Jack Dale. I mean, I followed Jack Dale at Tech. He had been basketball for 50 years, football for close to that. Probably the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life was following a legend like Jack. And I listened to him all the time. And he actually, when I was in school and started in JV broadcasting, I went to KFYO radio, and he taught me some of the ins and outs of what to do. And then I actually sold radio airtime like he did for a little while I was in college before I left and went to Beaumont. So Jack really started me off, and to be able to then follow him was just incredible. And I still, we in the booth, John Harris and Steve Pitts both worked with him. And in the booth, sometimes they will mimic some of his calls, in between when we're in our commercial break or whatever, and it'll really help the mood depending on what's happening in the game, of course. But no, those are the two right there. Vern and Jack are the guys for me.
Brian, when I first got to TCU, we would play tech and basketball. Obviously, we played them at football a couple of times, back in the day before, when the Southwest, after the Southwest Conference had broken up, before TCU got in the Big 12, and I got to meet Jack and do a couple of games opposite him, and the one takeaway that I had from the conversations with Jack Dale was that he was the nicest guy going.
Yes,
not just a gentleman.
Yes,
and would ask me about me. And I'm like, he doesn't need to ask. I'm just a slappy in Fort Worth, this young punk who shows up, and he took time to spend time. I mean, he was just the nicest guy going.
Yes. Yeah. Wonderful human being, fabulous broadcaster, and what a legacy that he has left behind in Lubbock and throughout the country because of all the wonderful people that have listened to him and were touched by him. So no, you're exactly right, Brian. This has been a wonderful time. I've really enjoyed the conversation with you, the great stories that you've brought to the program. Wish you nothing but the best in 2021, except for 1 week.
Exactly. Just 1 week. It's
just 1 week.
Right, yeah.
But I look forward to seeing you on the road again. That's something that I can't wait.
We need to see each other in person, as you said. The Zoom calls are fine, but they're not the same. And I'm just honored, Brian, that you asked me to be a part of this, man. I love what you're doing here, and I love your setup, man. It looks awesome. So I was honored to be a part of it. Thanks for having me.
All right, Brian. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in Lubbock this year, which is a game we're all looking forward to. If you're a Tech fan and a TCU fan, it's always a great series, and it's always great catching up with Brian on the road, but especially here on the program today. Thank you for listening and for watching. And again, YouTube if you're listening, podcasts wherever you subscribe if you're watching. And as always, I will put up on the screen here where you can catch up with Broadcast Booth on social media as well. And once again, great time. Really have enjoyed the conversation with Brian Estridge today.